Good afternoon, everybody. This is Michael Tucker, broadcasting live from Charlotte, North Carolina, kicking off our first Marketo User Group Roundup, which we jokingly call Warren and Michael go to all the Marketo user groups on planet Earth. It's been an interesting couple of months here. We have seen all of the Marketo user groups switch to virtual mode as we're going through the stay-at-home orders, and so it's a great time to be able to kind of get into to all this extra content without having to fly all over the country and all over the world. And thankfully, Warren in the Eastern Hemisphere, me in the Western Hemisphere, we've been able to kind of hit a lot of them. So, Warren?
Some of them are crazy hours as well, but there's a hell of a lot of content. Some of them are blurred, some of them there's similar discussions happening, but there's so much valuable content out there as well, which is it's just been great to meet and interact with different Marketo users as well. And everyone's been so welcome, which is the nicest thing about the Marketo community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that community is really expanding a lot too. So we have, as we're diving into this, we recognize that there's actually probably a need to do this on a monthly basis. There's so much content that's available that all these wonderful Marketo champions, Marketo certified experts, and just really passionate Marketo users are putting together. We've got 3 months worth of content to dig into here. And so, really this gives us kind of a good launching off point to be able to kind of say as well too. A lot of new user groups are forming as people are at home and they have the time to be able to kind of present this content. And if you are not in a Marketo, if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, if you're watching this on Facebook Live, check out mugs.marketo.com. You'd be surprised some of the neighbors that you have or people that are closer to you than you think that are building out Marketo user groups and interacting with each other. Let me get into the slides a little bit here, and I always kick off all of my sessions with just some group values. It's just a minute here just so that we're all on the same page, but this is a safe space to learn. We've got an open discussion that's here, but this is going to be a little bit different because Warren and I are sort of leading this, but we have a panel of Marketo user group leaders that we've invited to join us, and we're thinking that we want to rotate those around. So a lot of really talented people here, but if there's always things that we don't know, no matter how long you've been in the platform, there's something you haven't used in a while. So feel free to ask, and let's have an open discussion about some of those things. And that's one of the beauties of all of this collaboration that we have here. And to that point, it's not a sales atmosphere. So, we're not trying to sell you anything here. We're really just trying to help teach you more about Marketo and some of the marketing automation features that have been covered in these user groups. And I think our big point of this session is join our user group. They are very good learning sessions. They're also a lot of fun. And I think the one surprise that we had, and Warren, you can speak to this, is boy, have there ever been some creative things that people have come up with, things I never would have thought of using a Marketo user group for, but we'll touch on some of them a little bit later on, but I think you've seen probably more than I have with some of the different ones you've seen on in your part of the world too.
Yeah, no, we had things running from the DC mug that had a meme associated with a lot of Marketo actions. We had singers that had been opening up the initial user groups as well, which was a really interesting slant. We had people dive straight into Marketo. So Keith was one of those that went straight into the Marketo and really started sharing there and started building live, and that was a personal performance report. So you've got a huge breadth of different things, including features that kind of add on to Marketo as well that you hadn't initially considered, so different tools. And that's a really nice bit to pick up information as well, particularly if you're considering expanding your stack or considering enabling Marketo a little bit more across your marketing team. That's been really interesting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The last point I want to talk about here too is that these are all professional value added activities too. So, they've been fun and creative experiences that we've had over the past couple of months, but they also have contributed to the way that you learn in Marketo. I think a lot of us, well, especially on this call, if you work in Marketo as much as we do, you have to really love and enjoy what you do, right? It's a profession. It's a vocation, but in a way, it's also a passion, very strongly so. And so definitely want to bring that to the forefront here. And speaking of profession, so what we did here is we really, I don't know how long you've been doing this, Warren. I think I've been at this probably a couple of weeks later than you have, probably maybe the end of March after we got into the stay-at-home orders, just kind of going around the globe and going to all these user groups that are available. What made you kick this off, actually? Let me ask you this.
A good question. I honestly have no idea. I was like, this sounds interesting. Everything is now virtual, and I don't often get to communicate with the guys across the globe and their user groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was just seemed like I signed up for one, and then I was like, yeah, I'm just going to sign up for loads. I actually tried to think of a way to automate the sign up process and create some sort of macro, but that got way too complicated. But I ended up just signing up for all of
I
them, and
see.
all of a sudden they were in my diary, so I attended, and then I just enjoyed them. Every discussion that I had, there's not one that I didn't enjoy. Every single one, I gained something from it, and that's a huge testament to kind of the Marketo community and the user groups and how they're run as well. So that was just, yeah, that's
Mhm.
why really I signed up for one, and then I kept signing up.
Nice, nice. It's kind of neat to see that what that's blossomed into. And I can speak for myself, I just was really interested kind of seeing, especially the transition to virtual. I'd taken a little bit of a break here, but I'd, been involved with, Jenny's co-host at in the Atlanta user group, Taylor Enfinger, on really kind of rebooting these virtual mugs. And I just remember, kind of going into this and sitting in on a session saying, okay, well, we learned a bunch of things back in 2017 and 2018. And, Jeff Canada, you and I had been on several discussions and panel groups historically, and just thought it would be worthwhile to be able to help in, I don't know if coach is the right word, but maybe to be able to share some of the different tips that we learned through hard lessons. But then watching what you guys have built in San Francisco and what all these other user group leaders have built out, I really got hooked. And also, it helps me to continue to stay sharp and to engage with other consultants and continue to learn. Marketo user groups are very much the water cooler that I don't have access to right now with the stay-at-home orders. So, um, Jeff, if you want to kind of jump in and talk a little bit about kind of your process, you've been in the community quite a while too, so it's kind of neat to see, your work kind of transitioning and running the San Francisco group with Amy now.
Yeah, certainly. I think, it's obviously interesting times for everyone, and just seeing how we're adjusting the mugs themselves have been definitely a challenge. I mean, we've done only one thus far. I've got a big note for myself this week to schedule our next virtual meeting. It kind of got pushed to the back queue. But, I think one thing that we definitely learned was that it's not necessarily a one-to-one transition. I think what we did in our first one was try to mimic exactly what we did in person. And it's just not, there's definitely some things that are better suited for a virtual event. I think, ours was just probably a tad too long. We had two separate speakers, where I would like to take those two speakers, break them up into two separate sessions, and have more content on more different dates. I think people are really, I'm not going to generalize. I know I personally love to have new things to do apart from just like being heads down doing the work that I'm doing, which I don't know if other people are feeling this, but I feel like my work has exponentially gone up with a lot of these orders of being at home and of full-time working from home. The other thing that I've found just by attending a lot more of these is just like, it's kind of humbling in the sense that, like, as you said, I've been around the Marketo universe for longer than I probably care to admit, but there are still things that I just don't necessarily remember how to do, don't know how to do. There are different problems that I haven't necessarily approached. And I love getting in this kind of an environment and saying, hey guys, like, here's this problem that I've had, and I get 10 different ways to approach it, all really creative, all like correct, but like it's awesome. And there's like a bunch of new people that I don't know that I'm getting to know and learning so much. Like, that's one thing that I think this community has that we just that I've never experienced with other tools. Like, people who are so passionate and so excited about it and so willing to just like open up their instance of Marketo and show things and just go at it. And I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Actually, it kind of reminds me a lot of our discussion before Summit 2018 about the champion bar. It feels like you're in a champion bar every week with all these different people, and you're well, to this point, you're making new friends, you're learning approaches. And I mean, actually, we're doing happy hours, which wind up turning into these wonderful discussions afterwards too. So what we're going to cover today, just to give kind of an abridged agenda here, is we're going to talk about some of the topics. Obviously, not everybody is running user groups. A lot of people that will be watching this will be marketing operations professionals who just want to get to the meat of the matter, right? What's being discussed in these groups? It's nice to be able to read some of the documentation and some of the different blog articles that are out there. How much better is it, if a picture speaks 1,000 words, how many words does a video speak, an hour of video on some of the topics that are being discussed here? And so all that are pieces that we want to briefly touch on. If you're a sports fan, you'll probably recognize in your given sport that once a week, usually they would have like a highlight reel. We're kind of building a virtual highlight reel for all these user group events with us. And we want to talk about the experiences. We talked a little bit about some of the creativity, some of the relationships. So it's important to note, I mean, this isn't just content for content's sake. You're actually meeting other people that you might work with. You might, find a mentor-mentee relationship. At the very least, you find a collegial relationship where you can kind of come together and make new friends. I mean, the fact that Warren and I are doing this, living in two different parts of the world, we've never met each other face to face, and yet here we are running a user group Roundup session together, is pretty extraordinary, actually, to kind of what this does for the power of our relationships. And and then just talk about enhancing ways to that you want to actually use some of the learnings here in your Marketo instance. It's not the ability to use, let's take segmentation, for example. It's not the ability to actually build out a segment. It's what do you do with that? What's the value? What's the incremental revenue that gets built, or the problem that solves for a given business and its customer base? And there's been some creative conversations that have come up on actually being able to implement some of the theory that's been discussed here too, which makes this even more valuable than just reading a how-to document, right? So it's actually what you do, not just how you do it. And then plugging in some of the additional user groups. So that's sort of the agenda for everybody. Does anybody have any questions about that? We should go into some introductions afterwards, but does that make sense to everybody on the call? Okay, cool. Okay, well, let's go into introductions here first. I've talked enough. I'm going to hand it over to Warren Stokes to run this section, if you don't mind.
Yeah, totally. So as I mentioned, I'm Warren. So I've been attending like as many user groups as I can. I think it comes from a perspective of we don't have so many like European user groups that are as so accessible. So that's why one of the reasons I've been kind of doing that. And then that's the reason I've invited Chloe on the call, for example, because we are going to be starting a European virtual one, because we were so we're inspired by you guys on the call with different user groups, and also Chloe is really passionate about that. So Chloe, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well, that'd be great.
Don't forget to unmute yourself. Thank you for that, Warren, and thanks for inviting me onto this discussion. So as a quick little introduction, I'm Chloe Pott. I work for a Swiss software company, and I've been in the world of Marketo not that long, maybe 5 or 6 years, but I'm a 2-time champion, and this is my 2nd year. And this year, my goal as a champion was to start not just a France virtual user group, because I'm based in France, but a European, an EMEA virtual user group, because I've seen and heard so much about all the other user groups and been inspired by them. And to be honest, a little jealous that we don't have that tight-knit community that you can see exists over in North America, or over even in India and Japan. They have enormous user groups over there. So Warren has kind of raised his hand to help me co-host the first regional European VMUG that we're going to start up just in about 10 days now. It will be our inaugural meeting.
And then, of course, we've got Keith on the call as well, who does the San Diego user group, right, Keith?
Correct?
Yeah, and yours was one of my favorite as well. So if you want to introduce yourself as well, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
definitely. Hi, everybody. My name is Keith Nyberg. I am the San Diego Marketo User Group leader, along with my co-host, Marissa Seward. I've been a Marketo user for about 7 years now. I've been kind of a Forex Marketo champion and been in the space pretty much hardcore since I started using Marketo. At least for me, the Marketo user groups are so impactful because that's really where my learning and my networking truly began. I used to attend the Silicon Valley Marketo user groups back when Jason Siba and Adam Newwatterson used to run those. And just finding mentors, finding people to network with, just getting fully ingrained in the community and being able to ask questions was just so impactful that couldn't think of not continuing that as I'm later on in my career now. But it's really great to be here. I work at Adobe right now as a marketing technology consultant, and love Marketo like you all. So glad to be here.
And then over to Jeff as well, who's also going to be heavily involved in the discussions.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Canada. I run marketing operations at Segment here in San Francisco. Just like it's actually fun because today is my 6-year anniversary of having moved to San Francisco, and I wouldn't have moved to San Francisco had it not been for the Marketo user groups, because it was there that I got a connection and ended up getting a role here in San Francisco and moving back to California, where has always been my home. But yeah, it was through that I started consulting and really getting in, and now it's really, it's an honor to lead and co-lead, first with Jessica Cross and now with Amy Goldfine. Yeah, it's like a homecoming. It's I come back, I see former coworkers, former clients, current coworkers, current champions, former champions. It's like my home away from home, and I love it.
Perfect. And then last but not least is Mr. Tucker there, over there in the corner.
Hi, over there in the corner. Yeah, thanks for that and running that, Warren. My name's Michael Tucker. I'm a marketing technology consultant and work with a conversion store, basically helping different instances all over the place. I've been in the Marketo space. I think it's been 6 years now, 5 years now, I think, something around that period of time. And I've really just kind of worked in different types of sales and marketing roles for different tech companies for probably about 15 years or so, I guess, if I really look back on it all. So really interested in this. So glad that the group is kind of coming together like this, and just really love to see all the camaraderie that's come out of this. I've met more people than I ever thought I would have at the beginning of getting involved in this user group, and I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be able to do it. It's opened up a lot of doors, and it's always interesting, challenging work that is never the same day, to be cliche about it a little bit. And I think we'll see that in some of these conversations too, is there's a lot of different things that you can do here. So very interesting that way.
Yeah, definitely. Going on to the March content. So, yeah. So I think, Michael, you tended to quite a few of these as well, right? You attended the Chicago ones and stuff like that. So starting with the Chicago one, there's a lot of useful links, and we'll be able to share these links at the end as well. But in terms of the MC prep classes, you have to renew every couple of years, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. And it's useful to have just these additional links that you can then revise from and spot any changes in the questions to have those discussions. I think I believe Sydney Mulligan holds the record, possibly. I think it's unofficial, of the time taken for the MC prep. The MCE exam, and that was what, like 19 minutes or so, something like that.
It was pretty fast. It was pretty fast.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I want to challenge that, but maybe there's a competitive side of me. But there's a huge amount of, and this is actually quite common in some of the discussion points for especially some of the new users that have been attending some of the groups, and that's across actually any of the groups where the Marketo exam has come up, and there's often it's really nice to be able to help those users as well. So that one's come up quite a few times.
Yeah, I want to kind of mention too, right? Just you'll see Chicago come up here a lot, and while we're on the recording and going at it, it's worth mentioning that one of the Chicago co-leaders is on the call with us, Andy Carone, And Andy, it'd be great to just have you kind of step out from the shadows here for a second to kind of introduce yourself and kind of talk a little bit about how long has your group been around, and how are you producing so much content? And tell me a little bit about these MCE prep classes and how those have been going. Like who's attending them? There's a lot of questions there. So.
Yeah. Okay. So intro, history of user group, how we run so many, and then the MCE. Are those the four?
That's it.
You want? Okay. So I have been a Marketo user since 2012 and started attending the user groups back in the day in 2012. So I think I can kind of mirror that earlier comment about wanting to give back to that community that had helped me so much as I was first launching, my career in Marketo specifically. So I have been primarily in Marketo since 2012. Spent a little time in HubSpot, but Marketo's been, my focus and my happy place. I am a Marketo champion 2020, part of the inaugural class of the Fearless 50, and I've been running the user group since 2017.
Nice.
So the user group has been around obviously since prior to my tenure in Marketo. It's one of the earliest user groups, I think, at least in the US, and it's gone through so many different incarnations at this point. When I stepped up and kind of inherited it in 2017, all of the leaders had just had, like Joe had got the job in Seattle, so he left Chicago, so therefore obviously not running the user group for Chicago anymore. Some of the other leaders had taken different roles where they weren't using Marketo anymore, therefore they weren't a customer, just a variety of things. Mm-hmm. So I raised my hand along with Becky O'Connor, and we took a look at the user group and kind of where it was. And I think at that point, it was really vendor driven, and it had kind of turned into a soft sales pitch. And so we really wanted to step back and reinvent the user group and make it fresh again, cater to what that experience had been like back in 2012 and 2013 when I was going with my hand constantly raised up in the air, asking questions from the people that were there, doing what I was now able to do. And we've experimented a lot. We've already kind of implemented a month on, month off sort of rotation of in-person and webinars prior to all of this. So we were really well positioned to jump into just a purely virtual or largely virtual experience with everything that happened this year. So prior to everything kicking off with COVID, we had set up a webinar series around MCE prep, primarily focused for those who were going to be attending Adobe Summit and potentially taking the test there. But it was an interesting thing. So we had all of the webinars, and then we actually had an in-person prep, which we ran just before the shutdown happened. And we recorded that and shared it live. But as far as producing content at this point, Bartos joined us in 2018 as our third leader. And then recently, just this year, Becky O'Connor, who was my original co-leader, relocated to New York, and we invited Renee to join us as well, writer. So she has now become our new third. And I think that having three people and also having all of the ins that we have with other thought leaders, with other champions, other Fearless 50, has really helped us with developing content, right? We reach out into the community and say, who has a presentation on this? Who is willing to present on this? Who wants to do blah, 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 right? We're launching a new series right now on spring cleaning. It's a 5 episode or part webinar, right? And I'm a little late actually getting out of the gate. We were talking about it in April, and it's just rolling live now. So it'll wrap up when it's not spring anymore, but I'm sure, the world will forgive us given the current circumstances. But
I love how you're talking about episodes while you're inside the Millennium Falcon cockpit. That's just really good. Really good.
Yep. That's how we roll over here, I guess. So I think for us, it's been about shifting toward content and also upping user activity or engagement during the actual session. So when our speakers come, it's really informal. We have them sit. They're not up there talking at the group. It's conversational. We encourage stopping us during the presentation, asking questions when you have them, when they're top of mind, when they're fresh, because things get stale by the end of a presentation. You look at your notes and you're like, I know I had a question on blah, 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 but I don't even know what it was anymore, right?
Yeah.
So just that more interactive sort of component. And we've seen everything, grow really heavily from that approach. It's been great. So even with like a week and a half's notice on the webinar we have on Wednesday, we have over 30 registrants already. So
that's great. That's great.
No, it's phenomenal. So
Warren,
that's a little bit of our backstory. Did I miss anything? I feel
no, you got everything. You did it perfectly. And it's interesting because it pivots a lot of things. So you think about MC prep and this format now, what you're doing, bringing in the thought leaders that you are, you're learning some of those MCE concepts from really the best of the best coming in here, if I can say that. And what I want to do now is just ask, Chloe and Warren and some of the folks that are international. One of the things that I remember reading from Greg Waugh, who is wonderful at producing content on the Marketo bulletin boards, but he was saying, based in France, there wasn't a lot of resources for him back when he first started doing his MC. I don't know I can't remember what post this was or how long ago it was. It was several years ago, but there wasn't a lot of resources for him in France to be able to kind of learn and pick up Marketo and his MCE. So I wonder, if I could ask you, Chloe and Warren, if you could chip into this, because you both have said that the footprint in EMEA is something you'd like to help grow a little bit more. What were the resources like as you were preparing for your MCEs respectively?
It's a great question. My first MCE I took back in 2015, and I knew nobody in the Marketo community. I mean, this was back when the actual Marketo community online was still not as heavily used as it is today. And I studied simply just by playing around in Marketo. I just barely passed that MCE the first time. I think it was just pure luck. But as I've grown, and certainly as I became a champion, I've just been introduced to Andy and to Brooke, and I spoke on one of the Chicago MCE prep sessions on lead scoring. And I think just having access as a champion and in the community has opened up the resources to studying and attending other user groups, because in France there's only one user group and it's in Paris, and it's not very active. They have maybe once every 4 to 5 months a get together, and like Andy was saying about the Chicago user group, it's very vendor focused.
Okay.
Led by a Marketo partner. And down where I live in the south of France in Toulouse. There's no regional south of France user group at all. And so that's what really kind of stemmed the need for me to be in contact with other European Marketo users, because I'm sure the Chloe back in 2015 who didn't know anyone in the community, I'm sure there's still hundreds of people like that today in EMEA, and I want them to come meet us and to exchange with us and have because there's so many resources that are out there, and I just want to encourage the community feeling.
Yeah. I want to. Oh, sorry, Warren. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's I think it's important to remember as well that it's not just the study materials. It's actually, you gain a lot of inspiration. You look up to people on the user group, and it's really nice to actually go, that person is brilliant. Like, I want to be as good as those. Because my first Marketo user group ever, I'm lucky enough to be a champion this year, was February of this year, like the first London Marketo user group. And I was just blown away, like all these different people, lots of discussions. I was like, hell yeah, I'm going to sign up for all of these. And then that's really inspired me. And then, like, I hadn't really even reached out properly into the Marketo community. So that's really driven just not just my knowledge, but my thirst for knowledge as well. Like I want to find out more from other people and people doing different things another way, because it's twofold. It's the study and the material side, but it's also being inspired about looking at what some of the people have done and the ways that they've done it, and ways that they've really looked at a specific part of Marketo and really almost made it their own. I think that was really interesting to me as well.
Mm-hmm. I want to jump into the slides here for a minute and go back to the user groups that came up in March. And March is kind of a odd month, I think is the word I'm going to use, because again, a lot of the stay-at-home orders around the world really started coming in midway through the month. So there's, sadly, a couple of Marketo groups had to cancel their in-person events because they were happening as the stay-at-home orders were coming down. But we still had some content that came out, and it's kind of interesting to see at the bottom here that, new user groups started kicking off in Wellington, New Zealand, and in Tucson, Arizona, USA. So great to see both of those. Those meetings were. I think one was kind of a recap on 2019, and another one was just about comparing notes about Marketo best practices. I see here a couple of different kind of overlapping themes that kind of came up around operational programs. Both the Seattle and the Dallas Marketo user groups presented on that in this month. I haven't had any exposure to Seattle. I don't know if you have, Warren, but I have had exposure to Dallas and been really impressed by the content that's come out of that. I think, Keith, it would be great to hear from you a little bit, because I think Katumas runs the Seattle one, to kind of get a sense in terms of the operational programs and where just kind of a brief kind of point about where you've seen a lot of people kind of use operational programs in sort of a unique way that you'd recommend that you don't see out of the box, right? Like out of the box in market, you'll see things like data hygiene programs and things like that. But I just wondered if you and kind of the ecosystem and the framework that you work within have a couple of examples of operational programs that maybe we don't have to go into the details specifically, but just kind of what are some of those things that maybe people could build out in their Marketo instance that they haven't yet, but they really should consider doing?
Yeah, definitely. I think part of the fun in the user groups in general for me is it's like almost like a good litmus test, right? There's ways that we think that we can do stuff, and there's obviously a million ways to skin a cat. But that is kind of the funnest part, is by being a speaker and actually running a user group, you can kind of present a viewpoint or a position and say, this is why I think this is the right way to do it. And then you get it, not to say ripped apart by other people, but you can get great feedback on it. You can get not so great feedback. You can get considerations. But those are all how we continue to learn. So some of the ones that I actually presented at during this last month were 2 programs. One of them was kind of managing segmentations with, I think I called it like segmentation booster was what it was, but I'm essentially using static lists to pull some data that's not typically available to segmentations into them. And I, can consider that an operational program, can consider it, an extension of how we target and use segmentations. But that's a use case of a program that I see some companies leverage and some not, and that typically gets built out in operational. Separate to that, I did also present on an email frequency program that is solely intended to give insight into the number of emails that you're sending out to specific audiences over periods of time that are defined by Marketo. So understanding of your customers, how often are you emailing people? Is it 1 time a week, 2 times a week? Same thing over a week and even a quarter. That's just kind of another program that's intended to give insight. I'm seeing a lot of companies kind of jump back into operational programs. And I only think that the reason that we all focus back into that operations folder, at least in admin professions like ourselves, is that is really what our responsibility is for the business. Like, a lot of, enabling good campaigns and dynamic content and things like that are all very relevant. But I think a lot of the core Marketo user group like members and attendees and things aren't always on the campaign operations side. A lot of us are on the administrative operations side. And as a result, anytime stuff is uncertain or times are changing, we always go back to like, what are we doing? What are we really responsible for managing? And are we doing that well? Because at the end of the day, if we're doing that, it does enable the rest of our teams to function as needed. And if we're not, then we start to wonder like, well, what is the value that we're bringing to our company, right? And so anyhow.
Yeah. I totally get that. I want to pivot a little bit now to the next month here to April too. So, there's so much we could talk about for so much time, but recognizing some of the content in April, when we look back and look at the highlights in April, I see more content happen in April. I'm not sure if that's because of the pivot with what happened with the stay-at-home orders and what have you, and just people are kind of getting familiar with it, or if it's more there's some seasonality in there. I'm not sure, but Warren, I mean, look down this list and tell me some of the things that jump out at you here, and let's talk about some of them.
Yeah, no, the San Francisco mug was a highlight of mine. It was certainly one of the largest ones within America, if I'm correct. I think there was maybe like 50 plus kind of people, and Sarah Kennedy joined that one as well. And I'm kind of a bit like a fan anyway, because the way that she speaks, it just makes you feel okay, like everything's good in the world, which is kind of a nice value add to the San Francisco mug. And she kind of just talked around and she spoke specifically around how she presents virtual events versus live events, and the dollar cost of how much it takes to get someone to a virtual event. And that was useful for everyone on the call, because we're all in that space, but it's worth remembering. And again, I think to Keith's point, it's worth remembering just that context of why we do it. And that was a really key highlight for me when she came and spoke to that, and just condensed it really well in a nice, neat spoken package. And you're like, oh God, you're a smart cookie. That was a definite highlight for me.
Yeah, I really liked how they, even the presenters that came after Sarah as well too. There were some things that I hadn't, hearing the story about professional services and their best, the framework that they had initially developed for best practices for Marketo, and how that's evolved over time. Jeff Canada, you co-lead that group. How are you able to get all these speakers to come to your group? I mean, that's impressive.
We beg and bribe. No, I mean, we leverage actually the networks that we built mostly through Marketo User Group. I had met when I was and had met him in the Marketo offices, and I think Amy had a relationship with him. So it's just a matter of kind of internally at the mug saying, hey, if you have something that you want to hear about or you want to talk about, let us know. And we usually get a lot of action from that. So I think it's just a matter of kind of reaching out. And I'm an awful salesperson when it comes to pitching things and going out. Much better at my marketing ops role. But I think, just most people are happy to share about this kind of stuff. And I found the content in our first and only thus far virtual mug to be just I was sitting there being like, wow, this is stuff that this is great. I could turn that around, and there was actionable stuff that I could use right away. And I'll echo what Warren said about having Sarah on the call. She's just the consummate executive of being able to make me feel better with that things weren't as crazy as they felt, and really just being able to say what I was struggling to say to my executive team. She just worded it so perfectly, and I was just like, oh, thank you. I could have listened to her talk all day. I loved it. So that was a special surprise just from Kelsey, who works on the Adobe side, who was able to facilitate that for us. But I would say, reach out and see if she can talk at any of them, because
I think Kelsey, speaking of which, she's off today. She was invited to participate in this, and she's off because it's her birthday. So happy birthday, Kelsey. This whole session's for you. This is her little bow-tied birthday present for you. And feel free to ping her on her LinkedIn about that too. So I want to ask you, because Andy had kind of mentioned with what they're doing in Chicago about kind of building kind of episodic content that builds upon each other. Do you, as you're going out and you're picking these different speakers and presenters, do you have, a flow month over month of how you choose what topics you want to cover? Or is it sort of a pull, pick a topic and kind of a straw poll sort of a thing?
I mean, we're more organic when it comes to that. I approach it with because I've been sitting in these mugs since 2011, I think. It's when I first started using Marketo, and I just want to present stuff that I would want to hear. I want to answer questions, and selfishly, I'll say, hey, you know what? I'm working on standardization or something like that, and then I'll try to go and find people because that's something that I'm working on. Or, you know, when I was kind of not so secretly looking for a new job, I set up an air mug around Marketo career paths to just kind of explore which different path could I take as I moved into my next thing. So I love the idea of episodic, but particularly right now, where I think smaller snippets and, you know, keeping people's attention on Zoom, where we all just kind of are living right now, particularly right now, can be a little bit harder if it's just a big long thing. So I love the idea of like, here's episode 1, here's episode 2, and I'm definitely gonna reach out to Amy and ping her and see if we can set something up and mimic that and steal with pride.
Nice.
Well, and I think, you know, to that point too, like we do look for where people are right now, and then we build our episodes around that, right? So like, hey, there's more than half an hour, an hour's worth of content on going about your MCE, so let's break that out. There's more than half an hour, an hour's worth of content around, you know, cleaning up your instance and looking at that operational side of things. While maybe, you know, you have the time right now, or maybe you don't, but like might have it later. So let's break that out, right? So it's kind of the marriage of the two. And then our approach with speakers, and I think that Sarah Kennedy falls in this bucket, is don't ask, don't get, right? Like, you don't ask people to come speak, you won't get them. So just, you know, buckle down and go for it.
Yeah, I get that. I think I want to mention one thing that came up here when I look at this month, and you think of new sessions, and Chloe kind of alluded to this. Well, new groups that started out is London, and you know, my co-host here, Warren, was kind of your partner in crime in terms of setting this up. So. Chloe, tell me about the birth of the London Marketo User Group, and if you and Warren could talk about, because you had a pretty large panel in this first group. You know, when I look through the agenda on this meeting, wow, did you guys ever start big, just going off right away? And you know, this is not the session that you all put together. I wish I had been a fly on the wall on that one because of the amount of content that's there. But how did the two of you wind up meeting? How did you guys, you know, fall into putting together such a star-studded group to get that content together for that first meeting so far?
So the London one has been actually around for a little while. What we're looking at, me and Chloe, is the EMEA virtual one to expand that out a bit. So the London one is obviously not as accessible as you think, and it's very expensive to travel down there, but they do a great job at kind of coordinating the content there. And one of the things they're very conscious of is the people that they're speaking to actually resolving problems and having speakers that address specific problems and categories and theming it. And certainly, at least any of the user groups that I went to did a really good job at theming that content. I also, on the topic of kind of guest speakers and stuff like that, someone who's on this call actually, Jenny, she did the Atlanta user group. They had 2 different presenters, from the Pedowitz group, and also I believe Open Prize, and that was really interesting to see how you could make use of those alternative speakers, because there's a lot of companies that kind of carry a lot of value there, and inviting those was a great user group. So Jenny, I don't know if you want a quick thing on what your thoughts around speakers are.
Yeah. So it's interesting you bring that up, because we had 2 speakers, honestly, because we had started planning the user group back before things were shut down. And so Open Prize was going to be our sponsor, and they were going to come in and have lunch. And so we did kind of take our original format and use that for our first virtual user group. Unfortunately, you know, it got postponed until May instead of earlier because of, you know, scheduling and things. But somebody said earlier that, you know, they were saying they thought 1 speaker was good and length. And that's something Taylor and I talked about. While we think that meeting went really well with the 2 speakers and the topics, I think in the future, we probably will try to limit it to one speaker and maybe only 1 hour instead of 90 minutes to see how that goes. Because we did notice people started jumping at the 1 hour mark. So I think while we loved that meeting, we are going to try something a little different in the future. But so that's where that came from, though. It was originally actually in-person meeting that kind of got moved to virtual for our first one.
That's good that you say that too. So these incrementally change, and I've seen that over the years as well too in the virtual spaces. There really wasn't a template for how to run virtual user groups when we were getting started with the manufacturing one. And you know, Taylor and I were really, as we were kind of recruiting and kind of bringing on some of the other virtual user group leaders. I think the healthcare mug with like Jeff Krajewski and Kevin Weisenberger, we would actively have questions and side meetings, kind of like what we're all doing right now, except privately, to kind of say, hey, did this work for you? Did that work for you? I've noticed we used to have a mug leader hidden group that would exchange kind of notes and say, if it's a live in-person event, where do you have that in your city, right? Like, you know, in Atlanta, would you have that in Buckhead? Would you have it downtown? Would you shift it every month? Would you have it in the evening? Would you have a morning one? It's going to be different for everybody. And it's one of those things that you really learn by just getting experience and you know, learning from failures and celebrating successes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think as well, it's the balance of it. You sort of touched on it slightly about where you really sit. I'm kind of interested from as a wider question to the Marketo user leaders on this group. Like, how do you balance that between going too technical and welcoming new users? I think Bevy's going to help with that, because you can kind of see your attendees and look them up if you really wanted to. But I kind of wanted to open that question up about if anyone had any thoughts about how they balance the top, going too far technical, or just kind of covering the early things like kind of nurture streams and the basics of scoring.
You know, I can jump in on that one. I think we have the luxury of having a bit of a larger group, so that I had traditionally kind of structured things was have a more kind of traditional interactive presentation at the beginning, and then the second part would be like breakout tables. So like, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of whatever, something super technical, you can go over here. If you want to talk about reporting, sit over here. And if you want to talk about segmentations, then you can go over here. And I think that allowed us to like break things up a little bit. And then I would tend to float around the room and go in and add my 2 cents into whatever was being there. But I think that's one approach. I also just would, you know, kind of ask room. You obviously get a bias for whomever's in the room. So, you know, if you're trying to get more or different people in, then you know, going out through community or through, you know, email or whatever, just to ask to see. Again, we have a bit more of a sophisticated and an advanced user group in San Francisco, just by the size and the nature of the businesses around. So we can kind of get a little bit more technical, I feel, but I like to make sure that I offer up some of the more basic things, because for me, it might seem basic, but I remember when I first started, that was stuff that I wanted to know, like, should I structure a marketing tree? How should I name things? How should I do some of the more, you know, quote unquote basic things that are actually critically important and are really important for even people who've been working in the tool for 9 years to remember.
Mm-hmm.
I think we tend to approach every session that we can in sort of a beginner to badass model, right? So take it from somebody who's just inherited a Marketo instance and has no idea how Marketo works on this particular subject, all the way to something that probably some of us might take something away and go, oh, I forgot about that, or, oh yeah, that's really cool, or I hadn't thought about doing it that way, or whatever, right? So that way you cater to the whole audience and you don't come in with the assumption that everyone's at this level. Because I know when I first started attending user groups, I was totally a beginner, right? I was coming in green. So I think that's really important, especially for, you know, the recordings too that you put out, because they'll go out into the community and people will find them on YouTube and other things, right? So
Yeah, I noticed that when we were talking, Keith, at your kind of inaugural session too, that you had a lot of people who were like 1 or 2 years into the platform too, and I love the topic and I love the conversation. I wonder if you got a lot of questions from people afterwards, and what that first meeting, that experience with the audience. 'Cause you really don't know the first time you do a meeting what your audience is going to be like, but now that you've done that, right, what do you see forward as the next topic that you want to be focusing on, or what did you learn, I guess, from the people that you see who have attended your event, in terms of what you want to produce next for your next meeting and going forward?
Yeah, to be honest, I do kind of take an ad hoc approach of determining content relevant to like what I see happening in the space, what I hear people talking about, what I hear questions or initiatives coming up around. I would really love to talk a little bit about virtual event management, probably, to be honest, coming up here soon, only because I do think that's a topic that a lot of companies are working to solve, and there are lots of different philosophical approaches of how to kind of accomplish that. It's funny because I just hearing everybody else and how they approach stuff, it is a very user friendly, like kind of beginner welcoming type mode. And I'm thinking back through my session, I'm going, man, maybe I just kind of ran a little bit quicker with diving into deep content. And it's funny, I kind of guess I do philosophically think a little differently in the depth of the content we should go into as user group leaders. I totally want to respect and understand that there are beginners that are present. And I think anytime we're talking about how we're solutioning or finding ways to solve different business problems, that we need to walk through why the problems are problems for us, or what the technical limitations of the tool are that are leading us to these more creative solutions. But at the same time, I also do remember being brand new myself, and there are some topics that you learn about, 5 or 6 years into being a professional, and you wonder, and you're like, well, why have I never heard about this until now? Or why have I never heard of this solution until now? And sometimes I wonder if that's because we do a little bit too much sheltering of beginners. And so I almost take the opposite approach of throw people into the deep end, even if they don't philosophically understand how we got into the deep end. They're at least going to hear a lot of keywords, or at least philosophical topics that they may not know much about now, but because they've heard about it, they'll know that it's something they need to be thinking about or paying attention to or learning more about in the future. And so that's kind of my approach on it, is people have the right to ask questions. People have the right to, tell us that they get lost. But just because not everybody may be up at the same level doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to push them down a deeper path of understanding. So it is a little different actually from what I'm hearing from other people, that I'm just like, let's get right into it. And I wait for people to say, hey, I'm lost, and try to get them back to where we are. So
no, I definitely see that. Actually, it's interesting that you bring that point up. I can't, I know I've had several engagements where you're working with groups that are just using Marketo as an email marketing tool and don't understand the full value of like lifecycle processing and the, or ad bridge or nurturing or all these other things. And it just gets used as one really really overly elaborate campaign desk tool, basically, which is, it can do, but it's not really the full functionality and really why you would want to use it for that, right? I actually want to pivot for a moment too, and so this is all really good, and I love the conversations here, because I think that people are going to listen to this and realize, wow, there's so many different groups that are doing so many different unique things, and we want them to kind of get exposure to these different groups. One of the new groups, and I know this is a new group for the online space, is the Milwaukee group. And Jay, you're on with us here too, and boy, did you ever do something really interesting for your virtual user group. And I mean, Warren and I could try to explain what it is, but I really think it should come from you, and what the backstory of this is, and what putting together your session was all about, because that's different. I've never seen anything like that before, but I was pretty impressed when I saw it.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And circumstances having me join this call on my phone, which isn't the best for video, so I'll be audio only if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, it was fun for sure. We had a singer. She was actually based in London, and she basically kicked off our user group meeting in April, and it was a lot of fun. It was brought to our attention, like our local Marketo rep actually put us in touch with like a booking agent or something like that, and basically, he kind of worked it all out for us, and it worked out great. I mean, I think it was like mid-April, so COVID stuff was all still pretty new and rapidly developing. And we thought it would just be a really fun way, and kind of a way for people to maybe just take their minds off whatever, and just enjoy some entertainment to kick off the call. I think not only was it a lot of fun and like great entertainment, I think it was a really good way to kind of break the ice, get people talking and engaged. And I think we had some really good questions throughout the rest of the meeting. As we discussed we basically we had 3 different people talk about their key takeaways from Adobe Summit. And so in the Milwaukee user group, we have a pretty good mix of, some people have been using Marketo for years, and then we also have quite a few newer users as well. And so everybody who spoke at that particular meeting was a Milwaukee member. And so we basically kind of left it up to them, and we positioned it as, hey, Milwaukee Mug members. And, luckily we had some people come from out of the city, out of the state, out of the country with Warren and Michael and people like that. But, come just listen to your peers. We all had access to the free Adobe content. Come listen to your peers on what were their key takeaways. Cause, we're all kind of all in this together. And I think sometimes it just helps to hear, maybe it's not like a groundbreaking takeaway, but for every individual listening, they're going to have a different perspective on that. So, yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah, I would also say as well, it's worth remembering there's a multitude of different approaches. I mean, one of the things that always comes to mind is just emphasizing that it is a really safe space. And I remember particularly, I asked a question about the Atomo's job boards on Keith's San Diego one, and he shut me down. I was like, I'm not here to do that today, and then went on to proceed. I remember that very specifically. And then the other thing as well that I was a big fan of what Keith did is he went into Marketo. There was no, on his person performance, he was in Marketo showing the details so that when people asked questions, he was able to reflect back. And I thought that was a really interesting approach too.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that Keith did a great job with that. That's not easy to do a live demo in Marketo like that, but that was awesome content.
Yeah, I like that a lot too. Okay, I'm gonna. So time is always a scarce thing, unfortunately. But let's jump to May for a second here too, because I think another really creative piece that really gets us into May was something that Karen Fowler and Anthony Figgins and Sarah Ryan did in the Austin, Texas Marketo User Group. They actually had a tour of an animal sanctuary. So we all went on a video call and went around and were at a virtual viewing of a goat farm. And lots of stress going on around this point of time out in the world in general with after several weeks of the stay-at-home orders. And wow, was that ever a great session. It really kind of decoupled a lot of the other conversations that you'd see in the news media and the media cycle. But what was great about it too is it drew such a crowd that we had this wonderful discussion afterwards, which isn't recorded because it was a happy hour session. But it wound up turning into a really interesting, discussion altogether about how we as individuals, a lot of us have been working from home for years, but you still have these questions about maybe your spouse hasn't been working from home, or maybe you have kids that are now at home, and that was a very personal side of things too. So these aren't just all technical conversations. You are building meaningful relationships. We've had certain, I don't want to get into details, but we've had certain members of our community that have been personally affected by health issues while this has happened. And it's been very touching to see, some of the internal Marketo Adobe leadership step forward to be to offer moments of consolation and to see other people kind of get together, and that's been personally very heartwarming for me to be able to kind of see that and be able to kind of be there for other people and have them be there for me. So I really think that was a very interesting piece that came out of this. I want to talk a little bit about, I'm looking at everything else that happened in May here. And I think one of the things that I've been trying to bring to the table here with other user group leaders, so Jessica Cow came up with this idea, but Brooke has been very instrumental in being involved with this, was the book club, and talking about kind of leadership training with the armed forces. And we did a donations page that actually went to put money towards the Lead the Way fund for the Army Rangers to help them get acclimated to civilian life. And we talked to a Salesforce consultant about his experience, leaving the Rangers and then building his career in the Salesforce ecosystem. Very personal, very touching, compelling kind of stories that talk a lot more about, kind of what the personal impact and value that some of this professional development means. And I wonder if some people in the crowd could kind of share kind of the before and after, coming into your Marketo user group for the first time, and some of the people and the topics and thoughts that have sort of touched on you personally to kind of grow yourself, not just from the career side of things, but also your personal growth. And think imposter syndrome, think emotional intelligence, think things like that, to be able to kind of step out on your own.
I think for me, it's always, I'm inspired by people and ideas, and there's no better place to meet people and discuss ideas than the Marketo user groups, particularly when you focus on your career and how you want to develop. And you touched on it briefly around kind of the connections as well. And don't forget that if you connect with these people on LinkedIn, they're going to be sharing some of their content as well. So it's not just a one-time thing of you'll meet them on the user group and have a discussion. It's like you'll get an opportunity to connect with them, and there'll be something in the future that they post, and you would really resonate with yourself. So I think that's important also to remember. But in terms of, like, again, I mean, it's the Sarah Kennedy thing, like hold my hands up like I'm a fan, but it's like I was inspired enough to take action on having a look at how I'm presenting how a virtual event is packaged up. And it's that, it's just somewhat the way that someone has spoken about a topic that has inspired me to take an action. I think that happened with a couple of different user groups. Again, Keith, I used the program performance report in a way that I hadn't used it before. So it's those elements that really kind of stand out in terms of driving my career and my career growth. It's just the ideas that I've discussed and how to make that kind of my own and to improve it in a way that I would want to use it as well.
I think, it's really interesting having jumped into the deep end on the user group, having wanted to get more involved, but not really having had an opportunity until they just found themselves without any leadership. Up until that point, I was well established in Marketo. I was passionate about it, but I didn't necessarily have a forum or an inroad for developing myself as a thought leader, right? And as we were initially kind of resetting how we were going to deliver content and what type of content we were going to deliver and who we were going to have presenting that, I kind of got my foot in the door on starting to do that. And it sort of skyrocketed my own, brand, which was not something I anticipated. I just wanted to give back based on what I had gotten, 2012, 2013, when I first started going. But the thing for me that has been most interesting has been the way of giving back that I never thought about, which is, there's a wonderful phrase of lifting as we climb, right? The idea that as you climb the ladder, you lift other people behind you. And I know, we've seen people in the Chicago user group that have the potential to be thought leaders. They're really smart, they're creative, they're doing great things inside of Marketo, and they would never think to raise their hand to say, can I come speak, or I want to do this, right? And so we've reached out to people where we see that and said, do you want to? And they go, I never thought about it, so how can we bring those people up with us as we go? And I know Jay's co-leader, Kelly Trantow, who was one of the founders of the Milwaukee mug, I can't talk. She used to come to our meetings early, I think 2018, I was seeing her 2017. And I had the opportunity to present for them at the beginning of this year, which is really awesome. And she said, which I just didn't even know what to do with, and it feels weird repeating it, but that I had been her template for wanting to start the Milwaukee mug. She wanted to do what I did, and I just was blown away by that. But I think each and every user that comes that we can help do that for, that's the most important thing with the mug. Yes, it's important to help understand how to do things in Marketo and how to develop your skill set and open the door on stuff that Marketo can do that people don't know about. But really, it's opening up that passion for Marketo and helping them develop themselves as the next generation of user group leaders, of champions, of all those things, right?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that extra piece of content. I think back to my very first in-person summit, and seeing that they had professional development sessions. It wasn't all just technical sessions, and the keynotes. Steve Lucas would have these wonderful keynotes that were with business leaders. Our first book club was with Bill McDermott, who they had worked together previously at SAP. And I would think, and I remember saying this, that to the person sitting next to me, thinking, well, this is just going to be an SAP product demo session. It really wasn't at all. It was all about Bill McDermott, building up his career from rebuilding a convenience store in Long Island to selling photocopiers for Xerox, and then consulting services, and moving that into his role at SAP afterwards. And they didn't. I think they talked a little bit about software, but it wasn't much at all. It was really all about personal development. I think that's what makes the community and people have such a deep connection to it as well too. And you see a lot of the people that were heavily involved in making the Marketo community what it is, progress on into Adobe, into the space there too. And I think that speaks volumes to how valuable those relationships are and how personal those relationships are too. And let's hope that extends throughout Adobe as well. I want to just jump here for a second too, because this relationship conversation actually brings us into really our next point here. There's a lot of great things to talk about here, and some honorable mentions. Justin Norris had a great session in Montreal. Really enjoyed that. Loved Atlanta and the CSI Marketo session that the Pedowitz group had put on, and I think Warren already talked about that a little bit. I want to move a little bit too, because we won't have time to cover all of them, but we have built out a YouTube channel, which I do want to just mention briefly, if I have it on my browser here somewhere, is we built a YouTube channel called Marketo Virtual User Groups, and we've tried to aggregate all of the different on-demand recordings that you'll see here. So we'll put that in a link on social media content. I think I'll share it out. If all of you would share that as well too, I think I need to put a redirect in here, and we'll probably use, I'll put it off, I'll redirect off of my site if you all could do the same thing with yours as well too. And we'll do, I guess, I don't know, conversionstore.com/YouTube, and you guys, if you have different ones, I would appreciate it if you'd forward this as well too. But you'll see within each of these that, Salt Lake City, so Trent has been uploading all of his content as well too. So you'll see all of the different meetings that they have, et cetera, that will be on here. So you have that to be able to visit. And then as well, just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, so we talked a little bit about relationships right now. And I think, Warren, with all these different journeys that we've had, we've met a lot of really interesting people that we haven't met before. And so I want you all to think about a little bit about this for who you value. Go ahead and introduce this one, Warren. I want to.
Yeah, no, sure. So for me, it's opened my eyes to what the community actually is and who the community are. As someone who was very new to the community kind of in February, and I spoke quite passionately about it, about my ambitions for reaching out into that community when I applied for the champions. So I was lucky enough to be one of the champions this year. And the more that I've done it, the more that I get back from that as well. So in terms of influencers that I've at least spoken to, the user groups have done a really, user group leaders, sorry, have done a really good job at kind of welcoming newer users, and it's interesting to help try and solve and understand their problems as well. So as soon as and this is across any of the user groups as well, when they recognize that someone was new, say welcome, there was always that. They opened up to see if there was any discussion points at the end where because they've been welcoming, that the newer user had kind of piped up and felt confident enough to ask those questions, and you could see that collaboration happening. And the influencer there are the newer users. They're asking the questions, and you can see them actively. Kind of their voice picks up. They start to become a little bit more passionate. They get involved in those discussions, and that is that. I know it's not strictly a key influencer for me, but that is what I've been influenced by, along with I already mentioned Keith. So his was one of my favorites purely because it was in Marketo and showing the demo, but I've already kind of spoken around that one. And I just think that's a great way to learn and absorb content and remember it, and remembering as well, it's not directly translatable in terms of the meetups that were previously, but actually remembering that people are going to be at different levels. So some people might be behind on slides, some people that this the nurture campaign that Andy has presented on I think the Chicago one covered everything in such breadth that you can help but follow. So it was really comprehensive. But yeah, no, I think it's a great way.
So here's what we want to do. So we're gonna pose this question out to everybody on the panel and everybody in this audience. We're all Marketo User Group leaders. So put this in your mind and think about this for a second here, and think about, in the last couple of months, who have you talked to in the community that really brought something that really opened up your mind? So think, again, we're kind of thinking of this kind of like a sports replay show, right? So who are you going to give your game ball to, right? Who's that person that just, wow, blew your mind having a conversation? I'm going to go first to give you an example, but I want to pass this around to each of you to think about somebody, and it needs to be somebody who's outside of your own organization, somebody you wouldn't have met if you hadn't been involved in the Marketo community. So for me, my conversation was with Eric Morey. I'd never met Eric before in my life. I think we've connected on LinkedIn probably about a week ago or something like that. And Jenny, I think you've worked with him, so you might be able to speak to this a little bit more. But I was really impressed. We were at a Houston Marketo User Group. Jules James was presenting on alphanumeric scoring, and we had a huge question and answer session afterwards with Amanda, Karen Fowler, and Austin, and myself. And Eric was, we were talking about lead scoring, and Eric had this really great approach in terms of kind of opening up and talking about, we had questions about, hey, do you cap off your scoring? Do you say, okay, I've hit 100 points, that's going to be my closed one. What's that arbitrary number? And, he had this great point that I got was just, hey, you should let that go. Don't reset your scoring after a certain point. Don't cap it at a certain point, because if somebody gets to 15,000 in their score, that speaks volumes in and of itself. And then went into this wonderful deep dive discussion about email assets and HTML and character encoding. And I thought that was I thought that the technical expertise was interesting when I talked to Eric, but also he had a thoughtful way of thinking about things from a business user standpoint and saying, there's a reason why we're doing some of these technical decisions, because they relate to the overall health of the instance, but that also relates to the overall health of the relationship with the customers who are being nurtured and engaged with this. And I'm going to just, Warren mentioned Keith, so I think we should pass to Chloe next. You want to go, Chloe, and then we'll go Jeff and Keith, and then pass it around the rest of the room?
Sure. So I don't have a slide, but I do have a person who I've thought of. I want to call out Brooke Betos. She and I are both from Chicago. Well, she currently lives there, and I was born and raised in Chicago. And I met her through the Marketo Champion community. And we're both newish moms. I'm a much newer mom than she is. And I went home for Thanksgiving last year with my newborn son and my husband. And I met Brooke in a coffee shop in downtown Chicago one morning to put a physical face to the name of the woman I've been speaking to recently. And she is, she just knows, she knows so much. And she's been very motivating to me to help get me out of my comfort zone, because I've never been one to want to present and to want to raise my hand to get out there. But she offered me my first presentation within the Marketo community, which was the lead scoring MCE prep presentation I did a couple weeks ago. And so I just want to thank her for that. So she's really motivated me and influenced me. And so I'm trying to keep that motivation up. And in turn, I've starting this virtual EMEA mug group with Warren. And whenever I need a little shot of a pick me up, I just send her a little note, and she just finds the right words to say to make it all feel good.
Yeah. We haven't talked as much, but Brooke had 2 years ago, as I was getting started up on myself, just Brooke, you're the best. Okay, Jeff, go ahead.
I've been mulling over this for a while, but I think I'd have to say somebody who I wouldn't have met had it not been for like the Marketo user groups for the Marketo Champion program, who has become somebody who's near and dear to me is Jessica Cross, who used to lead the San Francisco user group with me until she went to the dark side and no longer is a Marketo user. But she just, from day one, when we both became champions, I was living in New York. She was living here in San Francisco. She just reached out and just was super welcoming and open, and just like, she became just one of my closest friends. And, we get along really, really well. We are the kind of the same person in different bodies. But I love her dearly, and she inspires me on a daily basis. And, both from a professional and a personal, on a professional and personal level. And I'm really grateful that relationship could have been facilitated by this group. And that's something that really inspires me and is really influential, that I'm not just saying about Marketo or how to be a marketing ops professional or a marketing technologist, but I'm really learning how to be a good human, and it's inspiring. And just to see that everyone comes to the table being so open and willing to share and willing to help you solve problems is really inspirational. And I'm super grateful for these opportunities.
Keith, how about you?
So yeah, to be completely transparent, I hadn't really attended a mug in a very long time, actually. And so honestly, running the first mug kickoff that I did was kind of my reintroduction into the mugs from having taken quite a hiatus. I have to throw out, I think everybody on the call, Michael, you and Warren specifically, joining and participating. There were a couple of times that I presented things as, these are some values, these are some benefits to taking this type of approach, and just kind of the anecdotal commentary back from other people on the user group of, oh, well, it also does this, and it also does this. In my head, I'm going, oh, wow, yeah, like that could be another use case for it, or this is another like way that this can become valuable. It just reminded me that no matter how much learning we do, there's always so much more to learn. There are so many other use cases that we don't always interact with. Like myself personally, I've never worked in solution for a B2C use case, which is just a very different world than the B2B space that I typically am used to. So just hearing what I think are the value statements and hearing other people come back as, well, these are other things that these could be useful for. How would you consider this? It kind of just reminded me that there's still so much to learn, even as a presenter, even as somebody who's been in the space for a long time. And that is just inspiring to me that you can't think of it all on your own, and we need to crowdsource good information and good ideas, and that's how we all learn. So,
yeah. Andy, who would you give your game ball to?
So it's actually someone completely outside of the Marketo universe. So after I'd been running the user group for a while, I had a gentleman out of New York City involved with Mocha reach out, John Russo. And it's been such an interesting thing to connect outside of Marketoverse with marketing organizations and kind of think about that at large. And that really impacted me and kind of the way I was thinking about what I was presenting and who we were presenting to, and actually how we were even gearing the Marketo user group, right? We changed it so even if you're not a Marketo user or you're a former Marketo user, like we still want to include you and make the content relevant and continue to sponsor that relationship, because you never know, you might come back to Marketo or you might become a Marketo customer. And I think that's key. I think it's really hard when people kind of get that chain yanked away when they lose their Marketo instance because they got laid off or whatever it is, right? So that I think is probably where my game ball go.
Sorry, that's my co-host, my assistant there. Jay, why don't you take it? I think you're the last guy in our call here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there are, I don't know, a lot of people, honestly. We've all talked about just how supportive and welcoming the Marketo community is. I mean, I've been really involved in the Milwaukee community for the last few years, but kind of recently, probably within the last year, have kind of expanded beyond the local area into more the national community. And honestly, I guess I'm happy to say that probably two of the people that come to mind first are on this call. Andy first. I mean, not too long ago, I was at a point where I was starting to look for another job. And Andy was somebody who I had seen, posts in the community, blogs, presentations at Summit, whatever. I got in touch with her through, she presented at a mug for us, and she was able to, spend some time on the phone with me, answer questions about, the world of Marketo consulting, things like that. Just super supportive as this person who I kind of looked up to in the community. And turned out she was really, just down to earth, like she said, climbing the ladder and bringing others up with her. So, Andy, I definitely appreciate that, and I hope you know that. Michael, I think, getting to know you over the last, several months, as I became leader of the Milwaukee Mug, I definitely appreciate your enthusiasm and just support for all of the user groups, facilitating the YouTube channel, things like that. It's been really good. Jessica Cow actually got on a call with me when I started up, or when I became co-leader of the Milwaukee User Group, just to share some of her best practices and things that helped her get her group up and running and engaged. Definitely appreciate that. Kat Champeau up in Montreal. I mean, the list goes on, but there are a lot of really good people here, and everybody's willing to help.
Yeah. By no means this is an exhaustive list, and thank you, by the way. That's very kind, Jay. I think that we want to keep going with this. So Warren and I have been talking a little bit about this, and we're grateful that the group is larger, and so many people have come on to be able to share a lot of these things. So we're running out of time, but the point of this is that we want to keep doing something like this. I think there's actually a need for it, especially as the content virtually is becoming so much more readily available too. And so our thinking is the first weekday of the month is we'll do something like this to kind of recap the previous month, and we'll rotate presenters and speakers, and then that way you get to meet the viewing public who may be looking at the recording of this, can meet other people across the community and get exposure to other Marketo user groups as well. And so have this slide up here to just, say if you haven't been to a Marketo user group before, you should go. It's mugs.marketo.com, has a directory of most, if not all of them, as more of us start to post the comments and sessions into there. And just some upcoming things. I know there are more Marketo user group leaders who are working on content for their next sessions, but a couple of things that are coming up in the Marketo universe. There's a new release of Marketo, a product update that's coming out shortly, and just 2 points that really stand out to me are predictive audiences that are being introduced in some of the program member custom fields. Some of the user groups that we talked about, I think, Andy talked about spring cleaning. The India virtual mug, we haven't had them on right now. I mean, they have a considerable time zone difference, but they're doing this fireside chat, which sounds kind of interesting to me, very kind of FDR-ish. and then I'm running a session with Dietrich Martens. I'm trying to do more sessions now with people in different parts of the globe too, recognizing that we have an opportunity here. So I would love to call on Dietrich, and he's been running the Netherlands NUG for a long time, and a really talented marketer too, to be able to kind of talk a little bit about what he has coming up. Anybody else have anything, a session that they want to talk about that they've got on the agenda quickly, and put in a quick plug for that?
I know that, I think, Jeff, aren't you guys running an SF cleaning one also? Or sorry, that's Chicago's on June 10th also for cleaning. So I think that's another one that I see Amy's face on it in the mug group. So it's on June 10th.
Yeah. I'll pull up the screen quickly. So these are, again, if you go to mugs.marketo.com, and you'll click upcoming events, and you'll see all of them. Hey, that person looks familiar. And then just different. Indianapolis is launching their first one in June, June 17th. So I'm gonna go to that one, and it'd be great if everybody else could kind of get behind them and make sure that they have a great event with a lot of really good attendance. So take a look on the website for that. The last thing that I want to leave is just kind of an inspirational mem. Life's been kind of stressful the past couple of months for planet Earth in general, but if all of these things that are on this are true, then everything's okay. And you always have people to talk to at the end of the day, and places to be able to go, if not your own house. Log on to a Marketo virtual user group, and we're all here for you. So thanks for attending, and we look forward to seeing you a month from now in the next recap, or at your local Marketo user group. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.